In the world of power, there's a truth most people don't want to admit, because it clashes with everything they were taught about being nice. Respect isn't built through warmth. It isn't built through constant friendliness, and it definitely isn't built through trying to be liked. Respect is built through something much more uncomfortable: consequence. Because here's what people truly respect, what they instinctively respect. They respect what they can't predict. They respect what they can't control. They respect what they don't fully understand. And yes, they respect what might hurt them if they cross the line. Now let me be clear. I'm not talking about physical harm. I'm talking about the invisible kind. Social consequences, professional consequences, psychological consequences. The kind that makes someone pause before they try you. The kind that makes them think twice before they disrespect you. Most people spend their whole life chasing affection. They chase approval like it's oxygen. They want to be seen as agreeable, approachable, good. And they believe that if people like them, respect will automatically follow. But that's a misunderstanding of human nature. People don't respect you because they like you. They respect you because they sense that underestimating you is expensive. And the moment someone believes you're afraid to lose their approval, they realize they can control you. Because if you need them to like you, you'll bend. You'll soften your boundaries. You'll tolerate disrespect. You'll negotiate your standards. You'll explain yourself. You'll apologize when you did nothing wrong. And to the world, that reads as one thing: vulnerability. And vulnerability doesn't inspire respect. It invites testing. Think about it. The moment people sense you're emotionally dependent on their reaction, they start experimenting with you. They see what they can get away with. They push, they tease, they undermine, they make little comments. They step over small lines. And if you don't make them pay for it, if you laugh it off, if you tolerate it, if you try to win them over instead of correcting them, you just taught them something. You taught them that disrespect is cheap. So if you want respect without needing to be liked, the first shift is brutal, but simple. You detach from the need for affection, because the moment you stop chasing validation, you stop being vulnerable to manipulation. You become harder to move, harder to provoke, harder to play, harder to corner. And that's where respect starts. Your power comes from the absence of need. That phrase is everything. When you don't need attention, people notice you more. When you don't need approval, people take you more seriously. When you don't need to be understood, people become careful with you. Because they can't hook you. They can't bait you into proving yourself. They can't control you with praise. They can't punish you with rejection. You're not chasing. You're not begging. You're not negotiating your worth. And that creates a kind of silent authority that most people can't explain, but they can feel it. Now look at the people who naturally command respect. The ones with real presence. Leaders. Decision makers. The ones who can shift the energy in a room without raising their voice. They're usually not the ones who try to charm everyone. They're not constantly trying to smooth things over. They're not rushing to be accepted. They don't over-explain. They don't constantly apologize. They don't perform. Instead, they do something else. They create boundaries. They establish standards. And they communicate, without drama, without yelling, that their respect is not given away for free. It has to be earned. That right there is the foundation. You become someone who doesn't need people, but can choose people. And when your attention becomes something you choose to give, not something you hand out to everyone who asks, you instantly change the power dynamic. Now, a lot of people misunderstand detachment. They think detachment means being cold, being emotionless, being unfriendly. No. Detachment isn't about being empty inside. Detachment is about control. It's about making sure your decisions and your reactions aren't being driven by your hunger for approval. It's about recognizing that your value doesn't rise and fall based on someone's mood toward you. Because the truth is, affection can be used as a leash. Affection can manipulate you. People can reward you with warmth when you behave the way they want and withdraw it when you don't. And if you're addicted to being liked, you'll chase that reward. You'll adjust yourself. You'll shrink parts of yourself. You'll compromise. But the moment you stop caring whether people like you, something flips. You automatically rise above petty emotions. You become less reactive. And the less reactive you are, the more powerful you seem, because people can't push your buttons anymore. And this is important. When someone can't trigger you, they can't control you. That's why the biggest threat to your respect isn't being mean. It's being predictable. Because predictable people are easy to handle. If they know you always want to keep the peace, they can pressure you. If they know you hate conflict, they can corner you. If they know you need to be liked, they can manipulate you with approval. Predictability makes you a tool, a pawn, something that can be used. So how do you detach from the need for affection in a real way? Not just as a concept, but as a lifestyle. You start by seeing the cost of approval seeking. When you seek approval, you give people power over your emotions. You hand them a remote control. And that power dynamic is unstable at best and dangerous at worst. So you cut the emotional tether. You walk into a room with a different mindset. Their opinion of me is not the deciding factor. And when you genuinely believe that, when you don't change your stance, your energy, your personality just to fit in, you immediately establish authority. Because authority isn't something you demand with words. Authority is something people feel when they realize you're not available for control. And once you build that foundation, something else happens. People can't figure you out. They don't know what you want. They don't know what affects you. They don't know what you'll tolerate. They don't know how far you'll go if they cross a line. And that uncertainty creates caution. And caution is the seed of respect. See, one of the strongest forms of power is being slightly unreadable. Not chaotic, not unstable, but controlled and hard to predict. Because unpredictability, used strategically, makes people stay on alert. They can't take you for granted. They can't assume you'll always respond the same way. And the moment someone cannot reduce you to a simple pattern, they treat you differently. They treat you carefully. And that's the beginning of respect that doesn't require being liked. Because now you're not trying to win people over. You're becoming someone who commands attention simply by existing in the room. And from here, we move into the next layer, presence. How you make people feel without saying much at all. Once detachment becomes part of who you are, something subtle but powerful starts to emerge around you. Presence. Not loud presence, not performative presence, but the kind that changes the atmosphere without effort. This is where most people get confused about power. They think power is about what you do, how much you speak, how assertive you are, how dominant you appear. But real power isn't about action. It's about impact. It's about how people feel when you enter a room. And how they feel when you leave it. Ask yourself this honestly. When you walk into a space, does the energy shift even slightly? Do people become more aware of themselves? Do conversations change tone? Do people register your presence, even if you say nothing? If the answer is no, it's not because you lack value. It's because you're leaking it. Presence disappears the moment you try to be liked. Because when you're trying to be liked, you're adapting, you're adjusting, you're smoothing yourself down so you don't cause friction. And friction, like it or not, is what creates force. A person with presence doesn't chase attention. They attract it through stillness. They don't rush to fill silence. They let silence work for them. They don't over-explain. They allow others to lean in. And this is why presence is inseparable from detachment. When you no longer need approval, your body relaxes. Your movements slow down. Your words become deliberate. You stop performing and start occupying space. That's when people feel you. Presence isn't about being aggressive or intimidating on purpose. It's about being grounded. Think about the people you instinctively respect, even if you don't particularly like them. They don't fidget. They don't rush their words. They don't nervously fill gaps. They don't seek permission to exist. They move like they belong wherever they are. That's the key. True presence comes from the quiet certainty that you belong in every space you occupy. Not because someone invited you, not because someone approved of you, but because you don't need validation to justify your existence. And when you carry yourself like that, others start treating you differently without realizing why. They listen more carefully. They interrupt less. They weigh their words around you. Not because you demanded respect, but because your presence suggests consequence. Now here's something most people don't want to hear. Trying to be memorable makes you forgettable. The moment you try to impress, you dilute yourself. When you exaggerate your personality, you become noise. When you overshare, you become familiar. When you constantly explain yourself, you become small. Memorability doesn't come from exposure. It comes from restraint. The people who leave the deepest impression are rarely the loudest in the room. They're the ones who speak only when it matters. When they do speak, everyone notices, because they haven't exhausted the space with unnecessary words. This is why presence is tied to scarcity. If people get unlimited access to you, they stop valuing you. If you're always available, always responding, always engaging, you become background noise. But when your presence is selective, it gains weight. When you don't show up everywhere, when you don't comment on everything, when you don't react to every provocation, people start paying attention. They wonder why you're quiet. They wonder what you're thinking. They wonder what you'll do next. And curiosity is a form of respect, because now they're oriented toward you instead of the other way around. This is where a lot of people sabotage themselves. They think being present means being constantly visible. It doesn't. It means being felt. You can dominate a room without saying a word if your energy is controlled, your posture is grounded, and your attention is selective. Your body language alone can shift power dynamics. Someone who slouches, fidgets, avoids eye contact, or moves nervously signals uncertainty, even if their words are confident. But someone who stands tall, moves with intention, and maintains calm eye contact communicates control. And control is magnetic. You don't need exaggerated gestures. You don't need dramatic movements. Every movement should look intentional, because intention communicates power. Now let's talk about something uncomfortable but important. Presence should make people slightly uneasy, not afraid, not threatened, but aware. When someone feels completely comfortable around you, they stop respecting you. Comfort breeds familiarity. Familiarity breeds casual behavior. Casual behavior eventually becomes disrespect. A person with presence creates a subtle tension. People can't quite read them. They don't know how much they're being judged. They don't know what's being noticed. That ambiguity keeps people alert, and alert people don't cross lines easily. This doesn't mean you act hostile. It means you don't dissolve into the environment. You don't become invisible. You don't neutralize yourself to make others comfortable. You let your presence carry weight. Another critical element of presence is how you speak. Not what you say, but how much you say. People who talk too much give away power. They reveal their motivations. They explain their thinking. They reduce themselves to something easily understood. But power lives in compression. Say less. Say what matters. Let silence do the rest. Silence is not awkward when you are comfortable with it. It's only awkward when you're trying to fill a void. And silence creates dominance because it forces others to adjust to you. Most people are uncomfortable with silence. They rush to fill it. They talk too much. They reveal too much. They expose themselves. If you stay quiet, they lean forward. If you pause before responding, they pay attention. If you don't rush your words carry weight. Silence shifts the tempo of interaction, and whoever controls the tempo controls the interaction. This is why the quietest person in the room often has the most power. They're observing, they're measuring, they're not reacting, and reaction is where power leaks out. Now, here's a crucial shift in mindset. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. The need to prove is the need to convince. And if you need to convince, you're already negotiating your position. A person with presence doesn't explain their worth. They assume it. They don't chase acknowledgement. They don't demand recognition. They allow others to discover them slowly. And discovery always feels more valuable than being handed something. This is why mystery amplifies presence. When people don't know everything about you, they fill the gaps themselves. They project significance onto you. They imagine depth. But when you expose everything, your thoughts, your plans, your emotions, you remove intrigue. And without intrigue, presence fades. So instead of asking, "How can I be respected?" ask yourself, "Where am I overexposing myself? Where are you talking too much? Where are you too available? Where are you explaining when silence would do more?" Presence is built by subtraction. Less words, less reactions, less emotional leakage. And what remains is something people can't ignore. From this position, respect no longer needs to be chased. It begins to form naturally, because people feel the gravity of someone who is grounded, self-assured, and emotionally unavailable for manipulation. And once presence is established, we move into the next weapon of power, unpredictability. Because presence makes people notice you, but unpredictability makes them respect you. Once you've built detachment and presence, there's one more layer that separates people who are merely noticed from people who are truly respected. Unpredictability. This is where power stops being passive and starts becoming strategic. Because the fastest way to lose respect, no matter how confident or present you seem, is to become predictable. Predictability is comfort, and comfort kills power. When people know exactly how you'll react, they stop fearing consequences. They know how far they can push. They know which buttons to press. They know when you'll forgive, when you'll soften, when you'll back down. And the moment they can map you, they can control you. That's why predictability is the death of respect. Think about it. If someone knows you'll always stay calm, they'll provoke you. If they know you'll always explain yourself, they'll demand explanations. If they know you'll always forgive, they'll disrespect you again. Patterns make you manageable, and no one truly respects what they can manage. Power begins when people don't know what you'll do next, when they can't anticipate your response, when they can't reduce you to a formula. That uncertainty creates caution, and caution creates respect. Now, this doesn't mean being chaotic or unstable. That's weakness disguised as unpredictability. True unpredictability is controlled. It's deliberate. It's the ability to break patterns when it serves you. Most people live on autopilot. They react emotionally. They follow habits. They respond the same way every time. That makes them easy to read and easy to manipulate. But when you act from intention instead of impulse, you gain flexibility. Sometimes you respond. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you forgive. Sometimes you cut access completely. And the key is that no one knows which version they're going to get. That's what keeps people respectful. They don't know if crossing you will lead to silence, distance, consequences, or complete removal. So they tread carefully. Unpredictability doesn't require drama. In fact, drama destroys it. Drama makes you obvious. Drama makes you emotional. Drama reveals your triggers. The goal is to be calm and unexpected. Sometimes you're generous where people expect harshness. Sometimes you're cold where people expect warmth. Sometimes you disengage where people expect a reaction. Each time you do this, you disrupt their expectations. And disruption forces recalibration. They can't rely on their old assumptions about you anymore. This is where respect deepens. Because now, people don't just notice you, they study you. They watch their words around you. They hesitate before pushing boundaries. They second-guess their moves. And that hesitation is power. Now let's talk about restraint, because unpredictability only works when paired with restraint. If you react to everything, you're predictable. If you respond emotionally, you're readable. If you explain yourself constantly, you're exposed. Restraint means you don't give people what they expect on demand. You don't rush to defend yourself. You don't rush to correct every insult. You don't rush to prove your point. Sometimes the strongest move is no move at all. Silence becomes your weapon here. Silence forces people to sit with uncertainty. When you don't respond, they start wondering, did I cross a line? Is something coming? Am I being judged? That mental discomfort does more than any argument ever could. Silence also reveals weakness. Most people cannot tolerate it. They fill it with words. They over-explain. They backtrack. They reveal intentions they meant to hide. And the more they talk, the more control you gain. Because you're observing instead of reacting. Silence gives you leverage. And leverage is the currency of respect. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means when you do speak, it's deliberate. Your words aren't filler. They're signals. Short, clear, final. People listen more when they know you don't speak often. Now, there's another side of unpredictability that most people ignore. Withdrawal. Knowing when to step away is power. You don't need to be present in every conversation. You don't need to fight every battle. You don't need to win every argument. Sometimes, removing yourself entirely sends a stronger message than confrontation ever could. When you disengage without explanation, it unsettles people. They expect reactions. They expect emotion. They expect negotiation. When none of that comes, they're left alone with their own thoughts. And that's uncomfortable. Withdrawal communicates something very specific. I don't need this. And needlessness is threatening to people who rely on control. This is where unpredictability merges with scarcity. If people can access you whenever they want, they stop valuing you. If you're always available, you become replaceable. But when access to you is limited, when your attention is selective, your value increases. Scarcity creates demand, and demand creates respect. This isn't about playing games or acting distant for effect. It's about valuing your time and energy so highly that not everyone gets access. You decide when to engage. You decide who gets your attention. You decide how much you reveal. And that control over access shifts the entire dynamic. People respect what they might lose. If they know you'll always be there, there's no risk. If they know you can walk away, there's tension. And tension breeds respect. This is why being too nice backfires. Nice people make themselves endlessly available. They give without limits. They tolerate behavior they shouldn't. They fear withdrawal because they fear being disliked. And because of that, people take them for granted. But the person who withholds, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, becomes someone people don't want to lose. They don't know when you'll disengage. They don't know how much access they have. So they behave better. They adjust. They show respect, not because they like you, but because they can't afford not to. And this leads us to the next and final layer, rarity. Because unpredictability keeps people cautious, but rarity makes them value you. And when someone values you deeply, respect becomes automatic. That's where we're going next. Rarity is where everything comes together. Detachment gives you independence. Presence gives you gravity. Unpredictability gives you leverage. But rarity is what locks respect in place. Because people don't respect what's always available. They respect what they might lose. This is a law that shows up everywhere. Status, relationships, business, influence. The more accessible something is, the less value it holds. The harder something is to reach, the more carefully it's treated. And the same rule applies to you. If people can reach you anytime they want, if you always respond immediately, if you always show up, if you always give your attention freely, they stop valuing it. Not because they're evil, but because humans adapt fast. Familiarity dulls impact. That's why rarity isn't about disappearing completely. It's about controlling access. You decide when you're available. You decide who gets your time. You decide how much energy you give. And that decision-making power is what changes how people treat you. Most people make a fatal mistake. They confuse availability with value. They think showing up constantly makes them important. They think answering fast makes them appreciated. They think being reliable at all costs earns respect. But what it often earns is dependence without appreciation. People get used to you, and once they're used to you, they stop respecting you. Rarity reverses that. When people don't know when they'll see you next. When access to you feels earned instead of guaranteed. When your presence feels intentional, not automatic. Your value rises. Because now, every interaction matters. This is why powerful people don't waste time on meaningless conversations. They don't engage in every group chat. They don't show up everywhere. They don't explain themselves to everyone. They conserve their energy, and conservation creates weight. When you're selective, people feel it. They notice when you show up. They pay attention when you speak. They remember interactions with you. And memory is a form of power. Now, here's the part that trips people up. Rarity is not about playing games. It's not about ignoring people to seem important. It's not about acting cold to create desire. It's not about manipulation. It's about self-respect. It's about valuing your time so highly that others feel it. When you don't rush to respond, you're saying, "My time matters." When you don't attend everything, you're saying, "My presence isn't guaranteed." When you don't overinvest emotionally, you're saying, "I choose where my energy goes." And those messages land, whether you say them out loud or not. People adjust their behavior around those who have standards, because standards imply consequence. If someone knows you'll always be there no matter how they act, there's no incentive to respect you. But if they sense that access to you can be reduced, delayed, or removed entirely, they become careful. They don't want to lose you. And fear of loss is one of the strongest drivers of respect. Now let's talk about availability in a practical sense. You don't need to respond to every message immediately. You don't need to say yes to every request. You don't need to explain why you're unavailable. Explanations weaken boundaries. Powerful boundaries are simple. "I'm not available. That doesn't work for me. I'll let you know." No justifications. No emotional padding. When you justify too much, you teach people that your boundaries are negotiable. When your boundaries are calm and final, people adapt, and adaptation is respect. This applies everywhere: work, friendships, relationships, social environments. The person who is always available becomes background support. The person who is selectively available becomes central. Now here's something deeper. Rarity also applies to emotional access. You don't give everyone your inner world. You don't share your doubts, fears, and plans with people who haven't earned that level of trust. Oversharing creates closeness but not respect. Because once people know all of you, they stop wondering about you. And without mystery, interest fades. This doesn't mean you're closed off. It means you're layered. People earn deeper access over time, and what is earned is always valued more than what is given freely. Now think about how this shifts dynamics. When someone knows they can't easily replace you, when they know your attention isn't unlimited, when they sense that losing access to you would cost them something, they behave differently. They show up better. They speak more carefully. They think before crossing lines. Not because you threaten them, but because the risk is real. This is how respect becomes self-enforcing. You don't need to demand it. You don't need to chase it. People regulate themselves around you. That's power. Now let's address a fear most people have. What if I become too distant? What if people leave? Some will, and that's not a loss. It's a filter. The people who only valued you for your availability will fade. The people who respect you for who you are will remain. Rarity clarifies relationships. It removes noise. It removes opportunists. It removes people who benefit from your weakness. And what's left is cleaner, stronger, more respectful connections. This is where many people realize something uncomfortable. They weren't being respected before. They were being used. Used for attention, used for emotional labor, used for reliability. And once they stop offering unlimited access, the dynamic reveals itself. That's not failure, that's growth. Now here's the final shift in mindset. Respect without being liked doesn't come from dominance alone. It comes from self-mastery, from knowing when to engage and when to withdraw. From knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, from knowing when to be generous and when to withhold. When your behavior is guided by intention instead of emotion, you stop being reactive. And reactive people never command respect. Controlled people do. Rarity at its core is control over yourself, control over your time, control over your attention, control over your emotions. And people can sense that control immediately. They may not like it, they may not understand it, but they will respect it, because it signals strength. When you put all of this together, detachment, presence, unpredictability, and rarity, you arrive at a position most people never reach. You stop asking for respect. You stop hoping for it. You stop trying to earn it through effort, kindness, or explanation. Respect becomes the default response to you. Not because people like you, not because you're charming, not because you're agreeable, but because you've become someone who cannot be easily ignored, controlled, or replaced. This is the final shift. Most people move through life trying to manage how others feel about them. They adjust their tone, they soften their opinions, they hide parts of themselves. They apologize preemptively. They explain their choices. They over-communicate their intentions. And all of that sends one signal. I need you to accept me. The moment you remove that signal, the entire dynamic changes. Because now, you're not asking permission to exist. You're not negotiating your worth. You're not dependent on approval to feel secure, and people sense that immediately. True respect begins when your value is no longer up for discussion. You don't debate it. You don't defend it. You don't advertise it. You live as if it's already established. This doesn't mean arrogance. Arrogance is loud insecurity. This means certainty. Quiet, unshakable certainty. The kind that doesn't rise when praised or collapse when criticized. And when people encounter that kind of inner stability, it forces them to recalibrate how they treat you. Because instability invites pressure. Stability commands distance. Now here's an important clarification. Respect without being liked is not about becoming cruel, hostile, or heartless. It's not about intimidating people for the sake of it. It's not about domination through aggression. It's about removing emotional dependence. Because emotional dependence is what gives others leverage over you. When you no longer need people to validate you, they lose the ability to manipulate you with approval or rejection. You stop reacting. You stop explaining. You stop performing, and reaction is where power leaks. From this position, you choose how you show up. You can be calm without being weak. You can be firm without being loud. You can be kind without being available. And this combination confuses people in a good way. They don't know how to categorize you. You're not hostile, but you're not soft. You're not distant, but you're not accessible. You're not emotional, but you're not cold. That ambiguity creates respect, because people don't know how far they can go. They sense that crossing a line would have consequences, but they can't predict what those consequences would be, and that uncertainty keeps them in check. Now let's talk about fear, because it's often misunderstood. Fear doesn't mean terror. Fear, in this context, is awareness. It's the awareness that you are not someone to be taken lightly. That disrespect will not be ignored. That access to you can be reduced. That your presence is not guaranteed. This kind of fear is quiet. It doesn't need threats. It doesn't need displays of force. It lives in restraint, in silence, in boundaries, in the fact that you don't chase, don't beg, don't react. People fear losing what they value, and once you've made yourself valuable through rarity, that fear becomes real. Now ask yourself something important. If someone disrespected you today, what would actually happen? Would you explain why it bothered you? Would you try to smooth it over? Would you tolerate it to keep the peace? Or would you calmly withdraw access? Because withdrawal is the final form of power. You don't need to fight everyone. You don't need to correct everyone. You don't need to win every argument. Sometimes the strongest statement is absence. When you remove yourself without drama, without explanation, without emotional display, it forces reflection. People replay the interaction. They wonder what they did. They question their position, and that internal correction is far more effective than confrontation. This is how respect becomes self-sustaining. You're no longer managing people's behavior. They manage themselves around you, and that's the difference between authority and force. Force requires constant effort. Authority maintains itself. Now here's the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Not everyone will like you when you stop being emotionally available. Some people will feel threatened. Some will call you cold. Some will say you've changed. Some will accuse you of being distant or arrogant. That's the price of self-mastery. Because the version of you that was always available, always agreeable, always explainable, that version was useful to them. And when you remove that version, they feel the loss. But the people who truly respect strength will treat you better. They'll listen more carefully. They'll respect your time. They'll think before crossing boundaries. And even the ones who don't like you will still treat you with caution. That's the point. Respect doesn't require affection. It requires consequence. And consequence doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be consistent. You don't tolerate disrespect. You don't reward manipulation. You don't chase validation. You remain composed. And composure is intimidating to people who rely on emotional leverage. At the end of the day, this isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling yourself. Your reactions, your availability, your emotional exposure. When you master those, you stop being predictable. And predictability is the only thing people can truly exploit. So if you want to be respected without being liked, remember this. Detach from the need for approval. Let your presence carry weight. Be unpredictable, but controlled. Make your time and attention rare. And above all, never negotiate your worth. Because the moment you stop chasing respect is the moment it starts following you. At the end of the day, the most important realization is this. Respect is never something you negotiate for, and it is never something you earn by being agreeable. Respect is the byproduct of how you carry yourself when no one is validating you. The moment you stop living to be accepted, you begin living from a position of authority. The moment you stop explaining yourself, your words gain weight. The moment you stop reacting emotionally, you take control of the dynamic. True power does not need volume. It does not need justification. It does not need to convince anyone of its existence. Real power is quiet, grounded, and self-contained. It shows itself in how you remain composed when others try to provoke you, and in how you withdraw when others expect you to chase or comply. That is where the balance of power shifts. Most people exhaust themselves trying to manage how others feel about them. They soften their opinions, dilute their boundaries, and compromise their standards in exchange for comfort and approval. And in doing so, they slowly train others to see them as harmless. But the moment you remove your emotional dependence on being liked, you stop being harmless. You become someone who cannot be easily pressured, easily predicted, or easily replaced. And when people sense that, they change how they move around you. Not because you demanded it, but because the risk is real. Respect is not applause. It is restraint. It is hesitation. It is the pause someone takes before crossing a line. When you master your presence, your emotions, your time, and your availability, you communicate a powerful message without ever saying it out loud. My attention is not free, and my boundaries are not negotiable. From this position, you no longer chase validation. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You no longer worry about being disliked, because you understand a fundamental law of power. People may dislike you and still respect you, but they will never respect you if they feel they can use you. Some people will resist this version of you. They will say you have changed. They will label you distant, cold, or arrogant. What they are really reacting to is the loss of access they once had. And that loss is necessary. Because respect does not grow in unlimited availability. It grows in consequence, scarcity, and self-mastery. Remember this: when you become rare, you become valuable. When you become controlled instead of reactive, you become dangerous in the right way. And when you stop asking for respect, stop proving yourself, and stop explaining your worth, you begin commanding it naturally, quietly, consistently, and without needing permission.